In the last Max video, we checked out the thermals of the case with two graphics cards that have at least some ability to exhaust a portion of the heat outside the case. But what about an AIB card that is side exhausting? Do those configuration inferences change here? Let's find out. Welcome to Machines More. It looks like the NR200P MAX is still at sea right now, at least for the US market, and freight seems to be piling up along the western coast of the US, and I hope this situation gets a little bit better. But it sounds like in other regions, like in Australia, you might have the case or you might be getting it soon, so good on you. In the meantime, let's take another look at the Max here. So initially, I did the thermal stress tests with this NVIDIA Founders Edition 3080 card. And this card's airflow design is rather special, right? And the key is that it has this blower section that pushes a good deal of heat out this I/O end. And this capability tends to be quite expedient for SFF cases. At a high level, we can just say this card dumps about, say, half of the exhaust outside the case. And unlike with a bigger case with more ambient case air volume, which can dilute some of that hot exhaust, when we're talking about a volume of sub 20 liters, the impact of a hot GPU like a 3080 is very pronounced. Now, even with the Pulse 6600 XT that was tested previously, despite not strictly being a blower design, the heatsink design is also such that the heat fins help direct some of that exhaust outside the I/O end of the case. And today I wanted to test a hotter AIB cooler design. This one here is the 3080 XC3 Ultra from EVGA, and it's rather unique in its own right because it's a 2-slot-ish AIB 3080 in a sea of 3+ slot monster cards. But let's take a look at this card first, and in fact the heat fin orientation is very similar to most AIBs on the market. And the predominant direction of exhaust will be out these two sides with a very small or insignificant flow through section here. It does have a vent on the I/O end, but that doesn't mean it will exhaust meaningfully from there. So before we get into the thermal results and implications, just a quick recap. With the two cards tested previously, the viable configurations with the glass panel was that stock configuration with bottom intaking fans, or you could also flip it the opposite way, with a top intaking radiator along with bottom exhaust fans. And depending on which component you want to prioritize, you can choose that. Although my preference there was with the top intake, bottom exhaust, since that means, at least in a worst case scenario, your CPU temps are still mostly in check. Yeah, 77 degrees on a CPU tends to be beyond what I'd like to see, especially with the 3700X. And an 80 degrees on a 3080 FE, it really isn't too bad at all. So with the vented panel, we have the same top intake and bottom exhaust combo that is viable, and the stock radiator configuration can be made to work by adding bottom exhaust fans to reinforce that negative pressure setup. Now either is good, but the negative pressure system does seem quite balanced, with the caveat that you won't get good results if you plan on swapping between the two included panels that come with the Max package. So instead of cycling through every single configuration again, I focused in on the same configurations that tested well. And let's just take a look here. So this 3080 XC3 card runs close to the same power of the FE card, which is about 325 watts. And it seems to settle in at around 70% fan, so that's what I locked it to in order to get some run-to-run consistency. Now 70% on this card is just a hair under 2000 RPM, and with 3 of these fans, it's just a touch louder than the FE card here, which was tested at 50% fans, and the noise with that card is about 0.5 decibels more. And I kept the radiator and the case fans all at the same speed as with the FE card's testing. Starting with the glass panel, the stock configuration plus the bottom intake yields thermals that are a bit higher than with the FE card, about 2.5 degrees higher on both components with the AIB, and this does push that CPU into temps that are getting pretty high now. But these GPU temps are still pretty good here, I'd say. And while the reverse direction of airflow worked very well for the FE card, well, it's actually pretty bad here. And granted, this is normalized to 25 degrees C ambient, but it's a little bit too close to 90 degrees on the GPU for my comfort. Although, as you might expect, since the RAD is intaking from outside, there's very little interdependence on the case's ambient air thermals, so the temp is practically the same. As for the vented panel, thermals with the dual exhaust negative pressure setup is good, In fact, it's a bit better on the GPU temps, and that's what I would recommend to go with here. With the bottom exhaust and top intake configuration, we're seeing that same phenomenon with higher GPU temps, and here the XC3 Ultra 3080 hit temps that are a bit on the warm side for a GPU, with pretty similar CPU temps as with the FE setup. So the big observation here is that while the top intake and bottom exhaust configuration works well for the partially exhausting cards, it wasn't great for this one, and I think part of that has to do with the actual position of the GPU in addition to the fact that it's side exhausting. So if you take a look at the Max case and where that open space is relative to the GPU, it's between the radiator and the card, and that space is that attractive spot for air to go. In this setup, the GPU exhaust coming out closer to the bottom isn't as much of an issue. The case fans basically take care of it right away and exhaust out of the case. However, the way the heat comes out indiscriminately out the other end of the AIB card is a problem. The exhaust on that end is spilling into the open space, and the airflow of the rad fans is then directing that exhaust pretty much back into the path of the GPU's own fans. If you were to leave the case in the stock orientation, plus those intaking bottom fans, that effect is less pronounced since the case fans will direct air towards the backplate side of the card, and there's very little space between the bottom case fans and the card, so the exhaust doesn't get forced into the path of the GPU fans as much, and the rad fans create an exit path on the other side. Of course, this is at the expense of CPU temps, and you saw here that the temps were a few degrees higher than the FE card because of that exhaust being present in the case. And with a CPU drawing higher power at full load, your coolant is going to be even hotter than what I'm seeing here with the moderate 3700X. With this card, I felt very little hot air leaving the case out the I/O end of the card, which is the norm with this type of cooler design. And if your desired setup is with this type of cooler, along with a hot chip like the 3080, and you're pairing a CPU that's drawing about 100 plus watts, while that glass looks pretty nice, personally I'd run the Max with the mesh panel and that negative pressure setup. If it's a gaming setup with something like a 5600X or an 11400, then yeah, I think the 280 has more than enough leeway here that it's totally fine to just run it with a glass panel in the stock out-of-the-box configuration and just add those bottom intakes. So as odd as the FE card's airflow is, it's actually quite good in the right scenarios, and with the Max it gives you more options, more headroom, and that was also at a slightly lowered noise level, and I really like the FE cooler design in general for this generation. Hope you found that helpful. This GPU will be making a few extra stops. I'll be doing a meshless build guide with it, and we'll be revisiting the C14S setup along with the OG NR200 soon, so make sure you're subscribed. Please give a like. Build components are down below. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.